Hello 8th grade. This video is your Chapter 7 Study Guide Vocab Review. Before I start, I do want to update you a little bit about what I've been doing. Of course, probably the same thing as you guys, a lot of Netflix, which brings me to my next topic, Netflix jokes. How'd you like that segue? I watched a really good movie called Bird Box. I hear they're making a sequel. I think it's called Chicken McNuggets. Oh man. I watched B movie. More like C- movie. Wasn't very good. Oh, jeez. You know, I never thought Netflix would be able to make any good original series content, but stranger things have happened. Okay. Before I start, I do want to let you know that in addition to making a video about the study guide questions and the vocab, I'm also going to be making a video where I talk about things that went wrong for you guys on the last test that you took and mistakes that were made. So I know a lot of you guys are probably not happy with where your grade is at right now, and for many of you that is really just because of the last test. Everything else you've been doing is good, meaning you're turning your work in on time and everything, but because we have this one big test, we don't really have anything else in GradeLink at this point. If you did poorly on that test, that really hurt your grade a lot. So there's really no reason to be concerned about what your grade is right now unless this quiz doesn't go well for you either. All right? So if you have a problem with your grade and you didn't do well on the first test, we'll see how you do on this quiz, Chapter 7, and then after that we can figure out what needs to change. All right? Because if you do well on this quiz, like let's say you have a C right now, right? Or no, let's say you have like a 70%. Okay, so that's a D. Okay, if you do well on this quiz, let's say you get a B+ on this quiz, your D is going to go all the way up to a C+, just because we don't have very many mastery points in GradeLink. Okay. And then you'll be able to, with the study guide, raise that into the B range, right? So if you did the study guide and you got a B+ on this quiz, your grade would go up from a B+ to from a D to a probably a B or B-. Okay, all right. Vocab. First one, Daniel Boone. So who is Daniel Boone? Daniel Boone was one of the early pioneers. He's talked about in the Moving West section. Here, let me pull it up. Oh, page came out of my book. Great. All right, so Daniel Boone was a pioneer who worked to clear roads through the Appalachian Mountains. All right, so remember in the early United States, the country was basically confined to the coast, the East Coast, and beyond that, it was considered to be wilderness, right? Well, Daniel Boone is one of those people who helped it make it more habitable, help make it more likely for businesses to be able to move out farther and farther west by exploring and by creating roads and pathways through the Appalachian Mountains. All right, slave codes. Slave codes were laws in the states that limited the rights of slaves. Right? So basically, if you had to summarize what the slave code said, the slave code said that slaves are things, not people. All right? So it was a lot of different laws that the different states had, but in general, they said slaves are things, not people. So therefore, slaves can't do things like they can't go to school, right? They can't vote. They can't own property, things like that. All right, system of interchangeable parts. The system of interchangeable parts was a, let's see what section it's in. This was created by Eli Whitney. It was a system in which identical pieces of the product are created en masse in a factory. Right? So imagine that you are a factory that builds, I don't know, like chairs, right? So your factory builds chairs. With the system of interchangeable parts, instead of having your factory workers, your machines build one chair at a time, right, what you would do is you would have part of your factory dedicated to building the four legs of the chair, part of your factory dedicated to building the cushions on the chair, part of your factory dedicated to building the actual structure of the chair, part of your factory dedicated to building the screws or nuts or bolts or whatever you use to put all the parts of the chair together, and then finally you'd have part of your factory dedicated to putting everything together into a single chair. All right. So the system of interchangeable parts is a kind of mass production in which assembled parts are manufactured and put together really quickly. Right? This was a big development in manufacturing because it made it possible to build more products faster and also to repair damaged products. Right? So with the system of interchangeable parts, if one of the legs on one of the chairs gets damaged, you don't have to throw the entire chair away. Right? Instead, what you do is you take off the damaged leg, you throw that away, and then you get one of your new legs and you stick that on. Right? And so now, instead of having to manufacture an entirely new chair, all you had to do is manufacture a new leg, which is a lot easier and a lot cheaper. All right, nativists. Nativists are Americans who were upset at immigration. Right? They wanted to limit immigration. So nativists believed that the country needed to remain white, Protestant, and native born. All right, the Cotton Kingdom. The Cotton Kingdom is a phrase we use to refer to a part of the South that made its money by producing cotton. Right? And much of the cotton was produced on these vast plantations that made tons and tons and tons of money for the owners. Right? So they were kind of like kingdoms in the South of cotton plantations. The cotton gin. So the cotton gin is a machine invented by, can't remember his name. Eli Whitney. Cotton gin was a machine invented by Eli Whitney that used spiked cylinders to remove seeds from cotton. So it allowed each individual worker, remember most of them were either poor farmers or slaves, to produce 50 times more cotton per day than normal. Right, so the cotton gin completely revolutionized the southern economy and textile mills in the north. Okay, Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was a canal dug in New York that connected New York City to Lake Erie, right? And within 2 years, the canal had completely paid for itself, and within the few years after that, made New York the wealthiest state in the United States, because all these factories were built alongside the Erie Canal, or rather the canal was dug next to existing factories, and they were able to use the Erie Canal to ship and transport materials and goods a lot faster. All right, Elias Howe and Isaac Singer. Howe and Singer were inventors. Let's see. What did they invent? Howe and Singer, Slater, Lowell. I'm blanking on Howe and Singer. I know it has something to do with textiles. Arkwright. I must not be in the right section. Morse. Oh yes, here we go. So Howe and Singer invented the sewing machine. So their inventions made it you don't need to know who invented which part of the sewing machine. They're two different inventors, and then together their inventions were combined into the sewing machine. You do need to know that the sewing machine made it a lot easier to produce clothing and other textiles. A lot faster, a lot cheaper, so it made it possible for even really poor Americans to own clothes. Okay. Corduroy road. A corduroy road was a type of road that existed in order to allow travel across like really marshy or swampy areas. Basically, a corduroy road was kind of like a floating bridge. What they would do is they would take logs, big logs, and they'd saw them in half, and then they would put all the logs together, like all in a row, across the river or the marsh or whatever they needed to cross. And it was basically a floating road, right? So the problem with corduroy roads is that it was really hard to travel across them unless you were traveling on foot. So horses that would travel across these corduroy roads, sometimes they would step in between the wooden slats and they would break their legs, and then you'd have to put your horse down, right? Or dragging a wagon across a corduroy road was really, really hard because the wagon would basically slam down on every single bump in the road. So it was a really primitive form of transportation or way to get across like a really marshy area, especially in the South. The South has a lot of swampy, marshy areas. So corduroy roads are what they used to transport goods back then. So they were really not efficient, not good. Better than nothing, though. All right, capitalist. A capitalist is a person who invests money called capital in building something. So either building a factory or a mill or maybe a turnpike or a canal, right? A capitalist invests their capital in building something, and then they get to charge people to use what was built, right? So if they build a canal, right, they spend a ton of time and a ton of money building this canal, right? And each time somebody uses that canal, they have to pay the capitalists or a company that the capitalist sets up in order to use the canal, right? So if a capitalist is smart about what he invests his capital in, he makes a lot of money. Capitalists could also make money by being owners of factories, right? So this is how a lot of factories got built. when people wanted to start factories, if they didn't have the money to do it themselves, they had to go to a capitalist and say to the capitalist, hey, here's my idea for this factory. These are the plans I have. And then it's kind of like an episode of Shark Tank, right? The capitalist is like the shark. And they say, okay, I like your business plan. I'm going to give you a bunch of money to build this factory, and in exchange, I get to own 10% of the factory. And I get 10% of all the money the factory makes. Right? Okay, telegraph. Telegraph was an invention by which information was sent over miles through a wire system. Right? So usually you would send something called a telegram, which is a coded message using electric impulses across wires that stretched for miles. So telegraph improved communication, obviously. Right? It existed before the telephone, but this way people didn't have to like handwrite letters to send messages. Right? You could just, if you had access to a telegraph, you could send a coded message to electric impulses or electric pulses that get sent over these wires for miles and miles and miles, sometimes hundreds of miles. And then, a message that would normally take 2 weeks to send might take, a day to send instead. All right, mass production. Mass production, let's see. We'll use your book's definition. Is the rapid manufacture of large numbers of identical products. Right? So it's basically what factories do. Right? They produce large amounts of identical products. Okay, Irish potato famine. The Irish potato famine was a famine that occurred in Ireland in the first half of the 1800s, in which 1 million Irish people starved to death, and many, many, many others, in order to escape that starvation. Millions left Ireland, and a large chunk of those millions came to the United States as Irish immigrants. Right? So the Irish potato famine is a big reason that there were so many Irish immigrants in the United States in the 1800s. Samuel Slater. Just saw Samuel Slater. Okay, Samuel Slater created a mill. Let's see. Oh, yes. So Samuel Slater was a English factory worker who memorized how to construct a machine, and he fled England. He broke the law and left England, because remember, in England, factory workers were not allowed to leave the country. Right? So he snuck out of England. He came over to the United States, and he got some capitalists to invent in a mill. Right? He went to capitalists and he said, hey, I know how to build these really specialized machines that all these English mills are using. So if you want to work with me, all right, you invest a bunch of capital, we'll build this factory. I'll tell you the secret information I have on how to build these machines, and we can get really rich. That worked. Samuel Slater became like the godfather of the American Industrial Revolution. Okay, Freedom's Journal. Freedom's Journal was a journal published by African Americans. All right, so let's see if there's anything more specific you need to know about Freedom's Journal. Let's see. I'm looking at this page that got torn out of my book. Is there anything else you need to know about Freedom's Journal? No. You guys are good. You just know it's a journal that was published by African Americans. Okay, Turnpike. A turnpike is kind of like a toll road, right? It's a road that was built by capitalists, by private investors. In order to use this road, you had to pay a fee every time you reached a certain point on the road. Right? That's what a turnpike is. Cyrus McCormick. Cyrus McCormick. Oh gosh, so many names. This is why it's a really good idea to have your vocab ready to go on your tests, because I'm teaching the class and I'm getting all these names mixed up. Okay, Cyrus McCormick, what did he make? He, I think, was from the north, so I need to look in the north section. If I'm wrong about that, sorry. Ah, yes, I'm right. All right, so Cyrus McCormick invented the mechanical reaper, which was a machine that allowed farmers to harvest wheat very, very quickly. Right? So the reaper and the thresher were combined, and it basically made wheat and therefore flour and bread a lot more bountiful and therefore less expensive. Okay, steamboats and clippers. So a steamboat is a boat that was used to transport people, goods, livestock, things like that across rivers. So steamboats are used a lot on the Mississippi River. So if you want to transport something from like modern day Minnesota to, I don't know, modern day Louisiana, right? One way you could do that is you would load your goods onto a steamboat, and the steamboat would sail all the way down the Mississippi River. They're powered by steam, obviously, right? That's what a steamboat is. Clippers, on the other hand, are small ships that can be used in salt water. So steamboats don't really work in saltwater transportation because the currents and the waves mess with the way the steamboat works. A clipper is a small, kind of fast ship that handles sea currents pretty well. So clippers are used to transport goods on salt water in the ocean. Steamboats are used to transport goods mostly on rivers and freshwater. Nat Turner. Nat Turner was an escaped slave who led a rebellion resulting in the deaths of 60 white people. So many of them who were not slave owners, but they were in like slave owning families. So they'd be like the children of slave owners, including slave owners too. He was captured, he was interviewed, he was executed, and his rebellion led to the deaths of many hundreds, maybe even in the thousands of innocent African Americans as retaliation. All right, that's it for the vocab.